My name is Laura, I'm 20 years old, and this is the story of how a moment of curiosity turned into the biggest mistake of my life. And I ended up cheating on my husband with our horse. What I thought would be liberating became incredibly intense and emotional, especially when I realized that the animal's tool was much larger than my husband's. But this would be the beginning of an adventure that would lead me to discover hidden pleasures that I never imagined and that would test everything I thought I knew about him. Desire, stay and find out, because this story is going to get very, very hot. Life has a funny way of taking us down unexpected paths. We grow up with certain expectations about love, loyalty and desire, and we often believe that we are capable of controlling our actions, but sometimes a moment of weakness can lead us to make decisions that change everything. That's how I started to lose control. For as long as I can remember, I have always been a curious and restless person by nature. Where the pace of life was calm but my dreams were big, I always yearned for something more, something to break the monotony of everyday life. My days were spent between school, homework and friendships until I met Roberto. Roberto was all young like me could wish for. He was smart, funny and had a smile that lit up any room. We met and quickly became inseparable. Our love blossomed with every conversation and every laugh shared. We moved to a house on the outskirts of the city where life seemed calmer and more promising at first. Our married life was idyllic. We spent our days enjoying long movie nights at home and deep conversations about the future. The routine began to deteriorate. Daily responsibilities took over us. Work and worries began to overwhelm our relationship. Although we still loved each other, there was something missing. That fire, that spark of emotion that once brought us together, seemed to disappear. I tried several ways to rekindle our connection, from weekend getaways to romantic dinners, but nothing seemed to work. The passion had become a distant echo of what it used to be. Meanwhile, my curiosity was still latent, wanting to experience something beyond the everyday. It was on one of those sunny summer afternoons, when I decided to take a walk in the countryside. I was looking for clarity, a way to connect with nature, and perhaps with that part of me that felt lost. Aroma of wildflowers and fresh grass walking along the creek became my escape, a place where I could reflect and dream. That day, as I entered the landscape, I saw a beautiful brown horse grazing in a nearby pasture. Its fur shone in the sunlight, and without thinking I felt drawn to the fence, and the horse raised his head and looked at me with kind, intelligent eyes. There was something in his gaze that invited me to come closer without thinking. I climbed the wooden fence and my shoes fell off. They sank slightly into the soft earth on the other side. There was something so calm and attractive in his gaze that I couldn't resist moving closer without really thinking about it. I climbed onto the wooden fence and my shoes sank slightly into the soft earth. On the other side, the horse was not scared. When I approached, however, he stood perfectly still, as if he had been waiting for me. I reached out my hand, marveling at the feel of his fur beneath my fingers. A horse. It was impressive in both size and strength. Gentleness in him that calmed me. As I ran my hand along his flank, the horse seemed to enjoy the attention. His ears were relaxed, and he let out a soft snort, which I took as a sign of satisfaction. I felt alive, and in that moment the connection with the animal gave a feeling of freedom that I hadn't experienced in years. Env Valentin, because of his calm demeanor, I decided to explore my hand more. He moved more, and it was then that I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Hanging between the horse's hindquarters legs was what? I assumed they were his genitals. I know it seems naive now, but at the time I didn't know much about equine anatomy. Curiosity surprised me, and before I could convince myself otherwise, I reached out to touch him. I was softer than I expected on the outside, but I could feel something firm beneath the surface. As I continued to explore with my fingers, I realized I was beginning to change. The firmness I felt began to grow and spread. I was fascinated, as I had never seen anything like this before. And apart, I couldn't look away. He continued to grow much more than I ever imagined. When he stopped, he must have been at least 35 centimeters long. The horse neighed and shook his head, which I interpreted as a positive reaction. Looking back, I realized how foolish and wrong my assumptions were, but at that moment I was too caught up in my curiosity to think clearly. I bent down to get a better look, noticing for the first time that the horse's balls were much larger than I thought. I was waiting, hanging and heavy. Without thinking, I reached out to touch them. They too felt warm and alive, with a subtle movement inside that I couldn't fully explain. As I continued my exploration, I noticed that a thick, clear liquid was beginning to emerge from the tip of the horse's tool. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before, sticky and shiny, almost like honey. The more I played, The more fluid appeared dripping in little puddles on the floor a moment before we continued with this. Such a fiery story. Be sure to subscribe and like this so you can help me keep the fire burning and bring you more irresistible stories. Now let's get back to this spicy story. In a moment of reckless curiosity, I decided to try it. The flavor was surprisingly sweet, remembering apples. I now know how dangerous, how inappropriate this was. But at the time, I was too caught up in the moment to consider the consequences of my actions as I continued to emerge more and more fluid. It was too much for me, and I found myself struggling to drink it all. Some spilled from my lips, adding to the mess on the ground. The horse's tool seemed to get even bigger, stretching my mouth uncomfortably. Suddenly, without warning, the horse started coming hard and grabbed me from behind. Surprise, and I couldn't contain it all. It splashed on my face and hair, leaving me soaked and sticky. In the middle of this chaos, I felt a wave of warmth and pleasure wash over me that now I am deeply ashamed of being so trapped in the moment. I didn't realize someone was approaching until it was too late. To my horror, I looked up and saw my husband Roberto standing next to the fence. His face was a mask of shock and disgust. "Laura, what the hell are you shaking?" Your voice was full with disbelief and anger. Reality crumbled around me. I jumped up, trying desperately to clean the mess from my face and clothes. "Roberto, I can explain this," I stuttered, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew I couldn't. There was no explanation that could justify this. Roberto's face contorted with anger and pain. "Explain? How you can explain this? I can't believe what I'm seeing." Stomach. The weight of what I had done hit me hard just once. "Please, Roberto, I'm sorry, I don't know what I was thinking. It happened." But Roberto wasn't listening. He walked away, unable to even look at me. "I don't know who you are," he said with a broken voice. "That's disgusting. I can't be close to you now." With this, he walked away, leaving me alone on the grass. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by shame and regret. How could I have done this? How could I have betrayed Roberto's trust in such a way that I stayed there for what seemed like hours of crying until I had no more tears? The horse stood nearby, oblivious to the pain and chaos he had inadvertently caused. As the sun began to set, I finally got up and headed home, dreading what would happen. The days that followed were a blur. Confusion of arguments, tears, and painful silences. Roberto temporarily moved away, saying he needed space to process what had happened. I threw myself into therapy, desperate to understand why I had acted so recklessly and determined to ensure this never happened again. Slowly and painfully, Roberto and we began to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy. There were times when I thought we wouldn't make it, when the pain and betrayal seemed too great to overcome, but we persevered, holding on. One day I made a solemn promise to myself and Roberto that I would never do anything like that again. I avoided the farms and pastures by looking away. If I saw a horse in the distance, it was a constant reminder of my mistake, but also of my mistake. My commitment to change. As the weeks turned into months, I saw small signs of progress. Roberto began to soften towards me, although the pain was still evident in his eyes. We began couples therapy, working through our problems together. It was hard work, often painful. But I was determined to show Roberto that I could be the wife he deserved. Over time, our hearts began to open again. Although the shadow of that day never completely disappeared, there was something that continued to haunt him. Through some old boxes in the attic, I found a diary that I had forgotten was the diary I started writing before I met Roberto, full of dreams and desires. When I read it, I felt a rush of emotions. My desire to explore my fantasies and an insatiable curiosity. At that moment, I understood that despite my autonomy, there was something in me that I could not ignore. I decided that I needed an answer. I could not continue running away from my own nature. So one stormy night, when Roberto was working late, I made a bold decision. I would return to Betrayal, where it all began. I wanted to understand what I had felt at that moment, and perhaps find a way to reconcile myself with my own curiosity. When I arrived, the place was calm, lit by light, the moonlight. The horse that was still grazing there, he approached me as if he remembered our first meeting. When I looked at him, I didn't feel repulsion or shame. Instead, I experienced a strange connection, as if the animal could understand my internal dilemmas. With my heart pounding, I went back to the air, remembering the intensity of those moments, and as I explored my feelings in that space, a torrent of emotions took over me: curiosity, desire, pleasure, but also fear and guilt. In my mind, I knew it was a dangerous line that I was crossing, but the momentum was overwhelming. It was then that I heard a noise behind me and saw Roberto standing at the entrance to the potrero, his eyes fixed on me with a mixture of horror and understanding. Here, Laura said with a voice full of disbelief. Roberto, I need to understand this, I replied with a trembling voice. In his eyes there was a flash of disappointment, but also of a curiosity similar to mine to understand what this disaster is that you have gotten out of control. Are you betraying everything we have built? He shouted, but his tone was not just anger, there was a nuance of vulnerability, as if he was also dealing with his own curiosity and desire. A dense silence settled between us, loaded with unexpressed emotions. I realized that deep down we were both searching for something that would connect us, a desire to break the chains of monotony and the pain. Finally, Roberto took a step towards me, as if daring to cross the threshold of the forbidden. Maybe we should explore this together, maybe there is something in we who didn't want to see, proposed his trembling but determined voice. The night became intense. A game of limits and desires in an unexpected twist began to discover not only what separated us but also what could unite us. That curiosity that led us to an abyss of pain now offered us the opportunity to create something new. While the moon illuminated our path, I knew that the end of our story would not be based on regret, but on the willingness to face together the demons that inside we had taken a dark path, but there was a light in the midst of the storm. Instead of a tragic ending, our adventure became a new chapter where curiosity became the spark that rekindled an extinguished fire. Together we decided to explore the secrets of desire and mysteries of our love, ready to face any shadow of the past. If this story arrested, you can't miss the one about my friend, a police officer who had an unexpected romance with a homeless man. Their encounters are full of passion and surprises. Click to open the video and dive into your adventure, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it for more stories that will leave you on the edge of your seat.